This is the 5th webinar in the Ask Hala webinar series. In the first 4 webinars, we've taken a look at some of what we might call the infrastructure questions and topics associated with remote delivery and supporting teachers in that shift to remote delivery is what this webinar series is all about. We're moving away a little bit from those infrastructure questions around which synchronous platform to use, which asynchronous platform to use, how can you get the most out of social media platforms for professional learning. We're moving a little bit away from those and focusing now a little bit more on the quality side and less on the quantity side. And today's webinar, the topic of which is learner motivation in remote settings, is the beginning of that more detailed look at some of the quality issues. So we're going to look at the effective issues connected with effective teaching and learning. One final point before I hand over to Hala. The choice of topics. We've now planned out the rest of the year's program in the Ask Hala webinar series, and it is based on what you have been saying, what you've been telling us through the question and answer box, but also by email, etc., about what it is that you are particularly interested in and what right now at this still fairly difficult period, what kinds of topics, what kinds of content you would find the most relevant. And learner motivation, which is our topic for today, is very much one of those topics that you've been suggesting that we look at over the course of these last 2 to 3 months. It's not too late, of course, to influence what the Ask Hala webinar series will cover. So if there are topics that you feel are particularly relevant, particularly useful right now, then please use the question and answer box to let us know. And during the presentation, please use the question and answer box. Tell us what you're thinking, tell us what your thoughts are, and to give us a shout out right now, where are you from? Yeah, where are you from? So if you could just type in to the Q&A box a hello from Bahrain or a hello from Tunisia or wherever you're based, that would be great. So I'm talking now, and I'm going to hand over to Hala, the face of the Ask Hala webinar series, who's going to be talking to us today about learner motivation in remote settings. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you, John, for the lovely introduction. This is the 5th in our series, and if you have missed any of the previous webinars, don't worry about it. Our local teams will be communicating with you the links to the recordings of the 4 previous webinars. So stay tuned, stay in touch with our local team and get the recording for the previous sessions in case you've missed any of them. Just a reminder to do the poll, and the link has been posted to you through the question and answer box, and the polling is about where are you joining us from. We'd like to know where are you talking to us today from. In today's webinar, we're going to look at a number of things. We're going to talk about the relation between remote teaching and remote learning and the impact of that on the learner's motivation. What are the main categories of motivation? Are all the same? Strategies to increase learners' motivation in remote teaching. And we're going also to think about the key considerations for teachers to take into account when they think about motivating the learners remotely. And we'll be offering you some practical ideas for motivating learners remotely. We'll wrap up the session with a list of some useful resources so that you can take them away and you can read more about learners' motivation in remote teaching if you like. So, what do learners like about remote learning? I'm going to show you now some stories either reported by the students themselves or by their teachers on the students' experience in remote learning. So let's see. The survey and the stories have been collected from various schools in the United States. This doesn't have to do with the elections, but this is a very interesting article really in Edutopia if you'd like to read more about what learners think about the remote learning. So one student in the 10th grade in an English class responded to a class survey by saying that he or she likes online learning simply because the student feels that they are in control of their day. They can structure their day efficiently. They can have parts of the day for studying, for working out, for relaxing, for completing their work in a timely manner, so they can organize their day better if they learn online. And of course, there are no distractions, the normal distractions they might get in the school. A teacher from Tennessee, Lauren Huddleston, a middle school teacher, thinks that some of her students are doing really well because they're getting the taste of more independence. And I think this resonates with the previous quote. They are taking ownership a bit more because they are no longer under the micromanagement of the school day. There is no headmaster telling them to leave this class and go to that class. They are actually managing their own learning, so they have saved more time for their leisure, for their fun time, for their relaxation and other activities. Another teacher from New Jersey who teaches Spanish thinks that some of the students who've been victims really of physical and verbal bullying at school are now having a safe space to learn because they're learning at home, in their bedroom, using their own laptop or their own mobile phone. So these victims of verbal abuse or physical bullying are now given a different dimension, a different space of time and a different element of time and space to learn safely. A psychology teacher actually from Alabama, and Blake is giving now an insightful idea from a psychological point of view about the social anxiety. And he thinks that the online environment allowed some voices to be heard without this annoying bit of social anxiety, without putting pressure on those students who feel shy and intimidated when you ask them face to face in the classroom. And I find this very relevant to me on a personal level, really. Ingrid, who is a junior student in California, simply likes online and remote learning because she can sleep more. It sounds simple, but sleep at this age is everything. If they can have some proper sleep, they can perform more properly academically. So simply, she can have 8 hours sleep properly and she can perform better. She can do better at school in general. Now, what about you? Tell us in the Q&A box very quickly about your learners. What's their position now? How they are dealing with the situation now? Do they like learning remotely? Have they managed to maintain their motivation remotely? What is the situation really now? Take a minute or two to type in your quick responses in the Q&A box.
Not at the moment, but while we're waiting, I did want to ask you that. Do you find that in your own life, that one of those advantages that you suggested around learning remotely, do you find that it enables you to structure your kind of professional life more effectively? That you're not interrupted by face-to-face meetings, people, coffee, that kind of thing?
Well, although I'm in a different situation, I'm not a student at school, but I can say that I'm in more control of my life, and I could actually pack more work into the 24 hours. It doesn't sound very positive, but if you're asking me about distractions, the face-to-face distractions and how this affected my productivity if I'm at the office working in a normal situation, well, there are no distractions, and I'm more productive and I can produce more work. And I suppose it's the same case for the students. They can focus more. There is no cafeteria, there is no coffee shop, they don't run after each other in the playground, you know, there are no bathroom trips. Well, they still use the bathroom, but not the same way they do in the normal face-to-face class.
Yeah, I share. I feel the same about working remotely. We've got from Riyadh. We've got a comment here that I teach primary classes and they like learning from home. Beside them, supporting them and helping them out.
Can you say the question again, John? Your voice broke up a little bit.
Okay, it's not a question, it's a comment.
Okay.
From Riyadh, I teach primary classes and they, the students, like learning from home because they have their parents beside them to support them. So what's your response?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, Treya. Thank you very much for that. And it's even more interesting because we're touching upon parents' role and what role they can play at home. It could be it's an existing challenge, but parents really can be a great asset to the process. They can support massively maintaining the learners' motivation by helping them, by giving them support to manage all of this cognitive load, or even supporting them with some technological issues. Some very young learners cannot simply deal with the laptops, or they cannot deal with the internet disruption or something. So the parents is there to help them process the information and deal with all of these technical challenges. So that's a very relevant point to today's session, really.
Okay, lots of comments coming in now. The comment about agency, which is quite an interesting one, I think, really, that you know, generally run around, play, move, that kind of thing. But the sense is that in the remote setting, they are actually really enjoying the process because it gives them more agency, more autonomy. And that relates a little bit to what you're saying about you know, the day.
Absolutely, and let's not forget that I keep mentioning this in the webinars. We were dealing with the Gen Z, or Generation Z. They want autonomy, they want ownership, they want to take control of their life. So yes, this comment is absolutely relevant to our content today.
And maybe finally on this one, then, quite a few comments about missing their friends, missing their face-to-face interaction. I think that's very understandable, isn't it? True.
We're not really saying that la vie en rose and the garden is full of flowers, and we're not saying that all students all over the world are absolutely enjoying the remote learning. And this actually connects to the very last comment you brought from the Q&A box, John, that they still miss their friends and they still miss the human interactive element and all of that. There are actually reasons for why motivation can drop in remote learning, and let's look at a list of reasons why motivation can fluctuate and can be affected because of the remote learning situation. Again, you say they miss their friends and they miss the interacting with their peers, but also they miss interacting with you, with the teacher. Because when you were with them in the class, you could give them instant feedback. You could give them instant attention and support. You could monitor them in real time. Actually, the virtual monitoring is difficult, and it can cause a little bit of delay in you respond to their needs and making sure they are on track. And this might give them this sense of isolation, and hence it can affect their motivation. Let's not forget that not only us, the teachers, are learning new ways of teaching, but they are also, the learners are also learning a new way of learning. And again, back to the point of interacting with their peers. Now they have to interact with their peers in a totally different way. And this is hard. This can be hard on them. Not to mention, of course, the technical issues. Everybody is suffering from the technical issues, the data packages, slow internet, etc. So this can cause them frustration. And by the way, either the technical issue is on your side or on their side, the frustration can happen. Again, back to the very important comment from Ria around the parental support at home, especially with the very young learners who learn at home. Sometimes they lack, although parents can be a great support, a great source of support, but sometimes young learners, very young learners, lack the support at home. Because everybody's busy, parents have very busy jobs, they might not have time or might not be available to support them, or simply the parents don't have the required digital skills to support the children. So young children and the parents are having different reasons for not supporting the young learners at home, and the young learners end up managing their own work and finding solutions on their own. This can be time consuming and frustrating as well. Imagine you're in a situation now that has been going on for 7 months, and it's going beyond the 7 months, and the whole situation is forced on you. Okay, we talked about Gen Z or Generation Z. They want to have ownership, they want to be autonomous, but now the whole situation is forced on them. They have been forced to leave school, they have been forced to go back to school actually in a different mode, in a different format. They have been forced to study at home using specific channels, and all of this forcing can cause them a lot of stress, and of course can affect their level of motivation. Maybe it's not an explicit reason for learners' demotivation, but if a teacher is not really confident about remote teaching or using this new format of teaching, their lessons might come across as less structured or disorganized, or they might be perceived as lousy teachers or teachers who do not know what they're doing. And this might cause some demotivation from the learner's side, because they are used to see you as organized, neat lesson plan, printed worksheets on the desk, different pen colors, you know. So, what are the main categories of motivation? Do we have one type of motivation? Of course not. And I think it's very important for us to understand the different types of motivation and where they come from. Individual motivation, and this includes really the confidence and how the individual feels about their own learning. Do they feel anxious? Do they feel confident? It's their attitude. And the motivation selves. We have two selves here. The ideal self, where I would like to be. I'm thinking I want to speak English at C1 level. This is my ideal self. And the ought to self, why I'm really learning this language. So why I want to speak at C1 level. What is my motive? What do I need this? There is also another type of motivation, which is the curriculum motivation, and this includes the learning materials themselves, the resources, the teacher, the methodology, the assessment, and the learning environment. It's the whole package that comes with the curriculum. There is also the real-time motivation, and it simply refers to what happens in this particular moment, the moment motivators. And this includes this particular task I'm doing, this particular activity I'm working on, this particular teacher's behavior and how they respond to me, how they respond to my questions and to my needs. Now, I have an exercise for you. On the screen, you can see a list of 8 statements. And I want you to match the statements to the right type of motivation. Is it individual, curriculum, or real-time motivation? Please send us your answers through the Q&A box. Just to type the number of the statement and the first letter of the motivation type. So for example, you can say 1C. It means 1 is curriculum motivation, or 4R, real-time motivation. And the one statement can take more than one type of motivation. Take me a minute or two to think about it.
Well, there's one lonely answer at the moment, which is from Nadine, who says 1 is R.
That's correct. Well done, Nadine. We can go through the answers together. It's you know, the first one, the learner is talking about a listening task and also is talking about a time at the day. So it's a curriculum and the real-time motivation. He's dealing, or she's dealing with 2 issues here. Curriculum motivation, the material, the listening task, and the real-time motivation, 7 o'clock on Friday night. The moment itself is not motivating enough for the learner. 2, understanding the lyrics of one of Taylor Swift's songs. That's obviously individual motivation. Perhaps you want to sing the song again to a friend, or you're going to a karaoke party at the weekend or something. So that's an individual motivation. 3, the learner is speaking about the teacher, actually. The learner here is referring to the teacher technique. So we have 2 issues here. The curriculum motivation, because there is a part about the pronunciation, and the real-time motivation, it's the teacher's manner, the teacher technique in teaching pronunciation to the student. 4, it's curriculum because the learner thinks that the materials were too much for the time allocated. There wasn't a balance between the amount of the materials they have to deal with and the time that was given to them. 5, it's obviously something has to do with the instructions to do the task. The learner doesn't know what to do with the task, the instructions. So that's the real time. That's the moment of doing the task. 6, that's individual because I'd learn this better. So it seems that the learner is contemplating about their own learning strategies, and it's curriculum because there is this online part of it. It relates to how the curriculum is delivered. In this case, it's delivered online. 7, it's individual because, again, the learner here is finding a benefit in what they're learning, because afterwards they will be able to handle overseas holidays based on whatever they learn. 8, the learner talks about working in pairs with somebody and they have a problem with that. So that's again momental. That's what happens in a pair activity or a pair task.
I was just going to butt in rudely there, if I may, Hala. Just to say that we've got some really interesting comments coming in. Really interesting. And lots of them are general, but they are in one way or another connected to the topic of motivation. So I don't think they need answers right now, but I think as we go through the rest of the webinar, it's good to have them at the back of your mind, I think, because you know, I think you probably would be covering some of the answers or some of the responses to the comments as you go through. Moody teenagers versus young learners, you know, different kinds of motivation. We're having comments coming in saying, you know, it's easier, more effective with teenagers than with young learners. The parental support that you touched on, that's clearly a very interesting topic. And as we've seen through our global research, that especially for learning English, that presents, according to the vast majority of ministries of education around the world, helping parents rather, be in a position to help their kids with English, yep, compared to maths or biology, particularly challenging. Really key question that came in about, do we think that the remote delivery has the same kind of positive impact as face-to-face on learning attainment, I suppose, is meant, and learning engagement? Key question that, and it's again linked, I think, to motivation. And the question of disability as well, is that having to work remotely, is that a further barrier to learners with disabilities? So 4 things there I thought were really, really interesting comments that I think that you know, you'll probably be touching on to some extent during this.
Yeah, it's good to have them at the back of my mind while we're progressing through the webinar, but I'll answer one of them and we'll touch upon the others as we go. The first one was really interesting, the moody teenagers and the young learners. The simple rule is meet them where they are, speak their language. You said it yourself, they are moody teenagers. They have a lot to go through themselves, you know, all of the biological changes and the hormonal changes and the emotional challenges they're going through given their age. This happens in a normal situation. Add to the challenging list being disrupted and being isolated from their gangs and from their peers and the fun activities they used to do. So meet them where they are, speak their language, embrace these difficulties, try to understand them rather than try to control them or impose something on them. And also another key tip is the routine. Maintaining a routine, whatever the routine is, just maintain it. Keep it, stick to it. So teenagers need discipline, but their own way. So agree with them on rules and call it the classroom contract or something, and agree on them and stick to them and refer them every time they break the rules, refer them back to the classroom contract. But give them some voice and give them ownership. Let them decide on the rules of the classroom under your guidance, so they feel that they are responsible for their learning. And the resistance also will be less greater than when you impose the rules on them. We spoke about different types of motivation. How can we increase these types of motivation? Speaking of individual motivation, what can we do to motivate learners on the individual level? Don't forget to give anybody a goal or a purpose of what they're doing. And again, this links back to the teenagers. For younger learners, and we've been talking about this in a different context, the teaching children or the way kids learn versus the way the adults learn. Kids wouldn't challenge you, wouldn't ask you about the purpose of what they're learning. A kid like a 5 or 6 year old wouldn't ask you, why are we doing this? Or why are you giving us this reading text? But teenagers and above, they would challenge you on the purpose of their learning. They would ask you, what's the point of doing this? What's the purpose? So make sure you set a goal. And the more individual the goal is, the more motivated the individual will be. So Ahmed, I want you to focus on your pronunciation, because I know you want to work as a TV presenter. And if you want to be a successful TV presenter, because it's your dream, pronunciation is essential, or proper pronunciation is essential. So you created a personal goal to an individual. Give them the sense of achievement throughout the learning unit. Give them objectives at the beginning and revisit the objectives at the end and see how much of that have you successfully covered. How much of that have they successfully understood, have they successfully dealt with, so they can get this sense of progress. And some teachers create visualization of this progress and achievement. They create a chart. You can have a slide, one slide on your presentation. With a chart, you have a beginning and you have an end. The beginning could be a rabbit starting a race, and the end could be a bunch of carrots, for example. So, and every time you finish a unit successfully, the rabbit steps one step further. It could be a fox and a box of KFC. It could be a car and the end line of a rally. It could be anything. Just design your visuals, design your slide, and make it there, make it visible, and use it to show them how much they cover in the syllabus, how much progress they make, how much success they can make throughout the learning unit. Whatever goals you set, make sure they are realistic and achievable. People are going through a lot already, so be realistic and give them achievable goals. Don't be impossible. And also the tasks you design, make sure they are suitable and they are accomplishable. What's the point of you spending hours designing an online task, and when you bring it to your lesson, nobody can do it? It's too complicated, or the time given is too short, or the amount of information is too challenging. Think about these things. Again, create a future self or a future self for the learner. Okay, Ahmed, you want to be a successful TV presenter. You need to work on your pronunciation. You need to have a very good English pronunciation, and show them an example of a TV presenter, a successful TV presenter, so they can visualize themselves in the future and take this as a kind of motivation. Now, how can we increase the curriculum motivation? When you design the tasks, make them relevant. If they feel it's relevant to their life, they will be engaged, they will be motivated. If you speak a different language, if you give them something, so for example, you're teaching a class of students, let's say, who live in a rural area somewhere in Jordan, Palestine, or Egypt. And the whole task is about a family that's spending their holiday in Las Vegas in America, for example. Is that relevant? Can they relate to that? Can they imagine themselves in their shoes? Can they imagine they're flying to Las Vegas with their family to spend a holiday? Again, be sensible about the amount of information versus the amount of time you give them. If you want to have meaningful learning, if you want them to be engaged in informed and the meaningful discussion, make sure that the time suits the information and vice versa. Use visuals, videos, pictures to keep their attraction, to keep their attention, and also to stir their imagination. This is a little bit holistic. This is not about a task in itself. It's about a series of tasks. So if you have a lesson with 2, 3, 4 tasks in order, if you have a course for term 1 and it has 10 units, think about the logical sequence. How do you stage your lesson? How do you position the different units in your course? And there is a theory that people learn better if you move from the known to the unknown, or if you move from the easy to the difficult. So you proceed from the known forward to the unknown. You proceed from the easy further to the difficult, not the other way around. You don't start with the difficult. You start with the easy first, with the familiar first, then gradually you take them towards the more challenging or the more difficult part. We've been talking about this almost in all our webinars. Personalize, personalize, personalize. They want to relate. They want to talk about themselves. They want somebody who understands where they come from. They want somebody to refer to their own problems, their own lives, their own challenges.
A comment that's just come in, Hala, well, two comments I think really interesting and directly related to what you've just been saying about, you know, when you look at the class, across the class, there are, you know, people are motivated by different kinds of things at different times, aren't they? So there's a question that came in, well, a comment about, you know, taking into account different learners within a group of learners, that they're all individuals, rather than having a blanket approach, I suppose, to motivation.
Absolutely.
And another interest, sorry.
Yeah, I was saying absolutely, yes, I totally agree.
And another interesting point about the relationship or the difference in meaning, or how these things work together, confidence, self-confidence and motivation. So, you know, that you become more confident at something, and that in turn fuels your motivation. It's a success, you're getting better, those sorts of things. So that's an interesting, I suppose, semantic discussion, isn't it, around how we understand the difference between confidence, or the relationship between confidence and motivation. Okay, yeah. Sorry.
That's fine. Yeah, very insightful comments. Thank you. Speaking of personalizing the content, here is a sample of a personalized speaking task. Please take a minute to look at it. It's a speaking task, and it asks the learners to think of a group of people they know well, and they think of the things they'd like to do together with them every day, every year, every week. Then they make notes, and the students would think about their moms, their friends, their classmates. So again, personalize, link the task to something they can relate to. How can we increase the real-time motivation? Clear instructions. We cannot stress this enough. We're remote. We're sitting behind the screens. We cannot really show them how to do things. So make sure you have the clearest instructions possible when you give them a task to do. Make sure you monitor. I know it's difficult to monitor them virtually, but you have the breakout rooms and you can monitor them. You can visit the rooms. You can go through them, listen to their comments. And in the breakout rooms, really, there is that option of announcements. You can give them instructions while they're working in the groups, if you think they're struggling with something. And they also can nudge you from the breakout room and ask for your help. So be ready to monitor, support, and respond to their needs. Okay, now we're moving on to the strategies we can follow to increase learners' motivation remotely. Feedback has been always appreciated, really, and even in face-to-face classes. They like to know what you think of their work. They like to know what mistakes they made and how they avoid them in the future. They like to celebrate their success and their achievement from you. When this celebration comes from you, it means a lot to them. Delaying in giving them feedback and celebrating their success and acknowledging their work might increase the sense of isolation and might cause them to deviate from the course. One online tool that you can use to give them feedback. I know you have your own tools, you've been using a range of tools for 7 months, but just one more tool to add your bank, if in case you don't know it already, is Vocaroo. Vocaroo is a simple tool online, it's for free, where you can record your feedback as a voice message and leave it to the students. And it's interesting if you don't want to use your WhatsApp number because you want to keep your phone number private. So this tool doesn't require your phone number, it's something on the internet, and you can leave them a voice note in a funny way, like, "Hey Mike, I really liked your writing. Good job, man. I'm so proud of you. Could you please take care of your spelling next time? Cheers. Have a nice weekend." When they hear it in a voice note, it might motivate them than when they hear it or when they read it in an email or something like, "Dear Mike, I've checked your writing and I think you've got some spelling mistakes to work on." So that's an idea if you like to use that. And also make sure you provide them with access to different resources. And actually we get this feedback even from adults. They want us to give them resources. They want us to show them the way to different ways of getting the information. Where can I find this? Where can I read more about that? Where can I find some activities around this topic? So always make sure you give them content and you make this content accessible to them. Give them links, give them free content, but also verify the reliability of your and the credibility of your resources. One interesting tool that I personally like is book widgets, and it gives you the opportunity to collate materials together and to put them in one place. So you can create, they call it in book widgets, they call it a discussion wall, where you can leave there a video plus an article plus a voice note from you plus a Word document they can use to fill in, a link to a Google Sheet where they can collaborate together. All of that in one place under one title, in one space. It's called book widgets. You just give them the link to the discussion you've created, then they go and they find the resources that you arranged for them. Diversify your teaching methods. Diversify your lesson types. Use visuals, use audios, use texts. Also, change the structure and format of your lesson. It's not always PPP, the presentation, practice, production. It's not always TTT, the test, teach, test. It's sometimes a project. It's sometimes a flipped class. So make sure you diversify your teaching techniques, your teaching tools, even your lesson types. Padlet is a very interesting tool, and it's for free if you want to get them to work on a project together. If you fancy changing your traditional lesson format and you want them to work collaboratively on something together, let's say a project, you can use Padlet. Or if you fancy flipping your classroom and you want them to do a pre-class task before your live session, again, Padlet can help you do this. You can upload on Padlet a quest or a video, then you trigger a discussion on Padlet, then they come and they bring their own materials, or they can add comments, or even they can comment on each other comments and work. The teacher's enthusiasm and sense of humor. It goes without saying that we need to keep our sense of humor during these difficult times. Yeah. And if they sense you lose your interest, you lose your enthusiasm, they will lose it too. So if you keep yourself inspired and motivated, and this shows in your voice tone, your attitude, the way you plan and prepare your lessons, they will follow your lead. it's infectious. They will be also motivated and inspired. And don't forget to use memes. Memes are everywhere. It's a guilty pleasure. We enjoy them. It's on Facebook. We like them. We share them. We tag our friends on them. So why not using them with our learners? And this is an example of a funny meme that you can use to attract their attention when they don't follow the instructions. Are you kidding me? It's simple and it might be overlooked, but screen time is important. Think about the learners' screen time and how much do they spend looking at the screen. In your English class, in their biology class, in their math class, and other classes. So what can we do from our side? I'm the person sitting on the screen now talking to them. What can I do to keep their attention? Don't put yourself on the screen all the time. Switch on and off the camera if needed. They don't have to see your face talking to them all the time. Sometimes it's your face talking to them, but also sometimes it's a video. Also, it's sometimes a different speaker, a recorded video with a different speaker who speaks to them, or an animation, or a chart, or a diagram, or 3 sentences they're looking at to find something out of them. Use your voice differently. Play with your voice tone. Use different intonations, falling and rising, to attract their attention. Even some teachers play with their voice. They switch off their camera and they read a simple text, a very short text in a specific voice tone, and they get the students to guess how they're feeling. Sad, happy, frustrated, excited, angry, from the way they talk, from their voice tone. Be ready to troubleshoot. I mean, test your technology beforehand. Know your ways. Have plan B. You know what to do if the electricity goes off. You know what to do if your laptop crashes. You know what to do if your internet connection struggles. So be ready, and be ready to answer their questions. Teacher, I cannot find the chat box. Teacher, I cannot see your screen. Teacher, I cannot click on whatever. So be ready to answer these questions. Use gestures and facial expressions. So you have your face and you have your hands. Use them. It's not only somebody staring at the screen, talking. Just use your fingers, use your hand gestures, and use your facial expressions. Don't just be a talking head. Keep an eye contact to the camera lens so they can feel you're looking at them the same way you're looking at them in the classroom. Minimize the distractions around you. You don't have to have a background full of distractions and so many items. Choose a quiet place, a suitable place at home to broadcast your lesson. Check your screen presence. Like, don't talk while the screen is like this. Make sure you're present on the screen. And as we said, be familiar with your technology. Don't use something that you don't understand. Don't use something that's going to be challenging to you. Don't do it. Now,
okay, can I just, before you go to the next slide, sorry, again, chipping in. I just wanted to bring your attention to some comments that are coming in that I think are really interesting. You know, again, you know, difficult and lengthy questions to answer, but about tracking passive students, I think that's a really interesting one. That, you know, that in whatever context, it's sometimes very easy, isn't it, to see what active students are doing because they're very active. So what do, you know, especially in the remote setting, about passive students? Comments coming in as well linked to motivation around knowing things in advance, and I think it's as true. And especially true, I think, for older learners, that having an idea of what's coming up next, you know, so that you can prepare for it. I'm, for example, the kind of person that really likes to prepare well in advance, so that I like to control the environment, that kind of thing, as you may have noticed. So it's for me anyways, and we're talking about different learning styles, that's great. If I know that the next 3 modules focus on X, Y, and Z, that's great. So it's a really interesting one. And I think also quite a few messages coming in that about how the content, what you're talking about, is resonating with the participants on today's webinar. That the things that you're saying make sense in context that where our colleagues come from. So some really interesting stuff.
Glad to hear. That's relevant. So just some words of wisdom for teachers to maintain the motivation. Again, don't go big, break it down to smaller chunks. It's more manageable this way. Assign them, again, we've spoken about passive learners, and you know that Omar is hiding behind the screen, and Omar is trying to keep a low profile and not to participate with the others. Find Omar, address Omar, and give them roles and responsibilities. And these roles and responsibilities can be very, very simple. They can be the project lead. They can even be the register taker, like somebody who checks the attendance. They can even be the mute master, somebody who takes control of the mute button if noise goes up really high. Omar, who is the mute master, is going to take care of it, and you assign Omar this role, and Omar is not a passive participant anymore. Please use their names. It works like magic. Address them by their names. Good morning, Marwa. Good morning, Hiba. Good morning, Tracy. And acknowledge their contributions by saying their name. Refer to their comments and their assignments by saying their name as possible as you can. Again, vary your ways of communication. Diversify your ways of communication. Not just using asynchronous platform like Zoom or Teams, but also use other asynchronous platforms like WhatsApp and emails. Now, a couple of practical ideas to improve the participation. And again, this touches upon the comment we had recently around the passive participants. The chat box, it's a simple tool, and to use it, it doesn't take you a huge skill to do it, but it's very interesting. So you can always ask them to type in the chat box, use emojis, send thumbs up, send thumbs down. It's very easy to do. It doesn't take them a lot of effort or skill, but also it will keep them connected to you. The very classic, very famous think, pair, share can be adapted to be used on Zoom. So before you send them to the breakout rooms, you give them prompts to discussion. You give them some questions to think about. Then you send them to the breakout rooms, but also you give them a shared Google document where they can record their answers and their notes from their discussions, and everybody else can see the shared Google document later. So think about the questions, pair in the breakout rooms, share through the Google document. Use the asynchronous platforms for discussions and the forums, and Edmodo and the Google Classroom are very useful tools for this purpose. Now I'm going to share with you a video from the British Council, where you can find more ideas for your online or remote lessons to make your lessons fun. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to share the video now. Hang on a second. We've put together this collection of short and quick ideas for you to use in your online lessons. With almost no preparation needed, these ideas
We put together this collection of short and quick ideas for you to use in your online lessons. With almost no preparation needed, these ideas can be adapted for different...
How are we doing? Is it just my internet connection, or is that working okay, the video?
I think it's my internet connection. I'm trying to, okay, let me refresh the page again.
We've put together this collection of short and quick ideas for you to use in your online lessons. With almost no preparation needed, these ideas can be adapted for different age groups and will help to make your lessons engaging and fun. For an appetizer, tic-tac-toe could be an idea to start your lesson with. It's a quick, fun way to review vocabulary, grammar forms, or checking your students' understanding. You need 2 teams and a grid with the language content you want. Share your screen with the students. Teams take turns to choose a square. If they answer the question correctly, they can mark the square. They can do that by clicking on View Options, then Annotate, then Stamp or Draw. For a side dish, you can check students' understanding by asking them to show answers on mini whiteboards. This can be a piece of paper in a plastic wallet. Alternatively, they can use hand gestures for true or false or numbered questions. For a dessert, you can make a graffiti wall to review or wrap up the lesson. You need to share your online whiteboard, then students click on View Options, then Annotate, then Stamp or Draw. Every student writes a favorite word from the lesson or draws a face with a big, straight, or sad smile to show how confident they are with using what they have learned. These are just a few simple ideas to get you.
So I'll go back to my slides now, and I hope you find the video useful. We'll be sharing the link to the video in the useful resources slide, so you can see the video again and the other similar videos we produced through the Teaching English team. And it gives you very quick, easy ideas on how to add this fun element to your lessons, and consequently you make your lessons more engaging and motivating.
There's been some interesting comments coming in around motivation I just wanted to share with you at this point in time. A very interesting one from Doha in Iraq, our dear colleague Doha, about reciprocal learning. And I think it's a really strong point as it relates to motivation, that for a learner, especially a young person, to be able to help the teacher to understand something, especially in this context where we might suggest that some of our learners are actually much better at us in terms of their technical competence. So that's a really, really important point, you know, about motivation and the learner teaching the teacher. I think that's a good one. And another point, I think, again, really central to motivation, this idea of individual contact, the ability of the teacher to reach out to individuals, not just to teach a mass of students, but individuals within the group.
I was on mute. And we always say collect feedback from the parents, your peers, your colleagues, the teachers, and the learners. Don't forget to get feedback from the learners. Again, they might help you understand their situation better. Speaking of the learners, one last tip from our side is to keep them going even after the lesson, even when you're not connected with them online or synchronously or during the live lesson. And there's a very interesting article by Larry Ferlazzo, and where he suggests what he calls low stress but high interest activities that they can do outside the classroom. And he's recommending really the British Council applications, mobile apps, as well as Duolingo, the very famous language mobile app. And the British Council has got a range of mobile apps really, and we assume that there is a growing interest amongst our learners, and especially young learners and teenagers and Gen Z, on using, because they stick to their mobile phones all the time. They're almost staring at the screen all the time. So give them, again, speak their language, meet them where they are, and they give them what they want. There is a range of mobile apps offered by the British Council, and specifically Learning Time with Timmy. This is specifically for the young learners. We've covered these points in today's webinar, and I'd like to leave you with some useful resources. A very interesting article published by Edutopia on why some kids thrive during the remote learning, why it's in their favor. Another article published by the Teaching English British Council website on maintaining students' motivation while teaching remotely. The Cambridge ELT blog, a lot of interesting tips there on maintaining your students' motivation. The book widgets, the tool I told you they also have a blog, and they have some strategies on how to increase students' motivation. Don't forget to watch Graham Stanley's webinar on YouTube on how to maintain students' engagement while teaching them remotely. And finally, the article by Larry Ferlazzo, the one I just mentioned, on creating conditions for students to be motivated outside the class. That's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're not quite letting you off the hook just yet.
That's not that easy.
We're going to squeeze the last bit of juice out of the Ask Hala machine. I've got a couple of suggestions. One, I think, is that we ought to do a separate webinar that focuses on specifically on young learners. I think this has come up time and time again in our webinars, and I think that would be an excellent focus for us, not just in relation to motivation, although I suppose fundamentally everything is linked to motivation, but around how to track progress, those issues there. We've had a number of comments about how do you do that. You know, you've got learners who are passive, and how do you assess how well they're doing, and how can you from that assessment give them as individuals the kind of support that you would normally give them in a face-to-face environment, in a perhaps easier, more accessible way. And on the subject of future subjects to include in our already planned program, learners with disabilities. This again is one of those themes and topics that we keep coming back to. There've been a number of comments, just one from Sandy here in Lebanon, about, you know, what is the provision, what are the tips, what is the approach, how do you get a strategy going together, you know, for learners who have, you know, different kinds of disability, from mild to acute. So I think that would be an interesting topic, and we'll look into how we can best facilitate that. It's an important one. Okay, that's, I think, a relatively adequate summary of some of the really interesting comments that have come in. So I won't look at the Q&A box any further. I just wanted to leave one final comment. You know, fantastic that you could get references to Taylor Swift and Kentucky Fried Chicken in the webinar. That's always good to hear. And our reoccurring observation that everything has changed and nothing has changed, in the sense that many of the things that you were talking about are principles of good teaching. They're not principles only of good remote teaching, remote delivery, but principles of good teaching. So that is something I know that many of our colleagues and practitioners across the world are hanging on to in this shift to remote delivery, that those principles essentially around encouraging motivation, understanding learners as individuals, being learner-centered, all of those things are as relevant in the remote delivery context as they are in the face-to-face context, I would argue. What are your closing thoughts on that?
I think that's the deal. I think it's very dangerous to say that, okay, there is a global pandemic, we're changing our teaching principles. That's very dangerous. Teaching is teaching, proper teaching is proper teaching. Principles of proper teaching will remain the same. And actually, we cannot afford violating this. We cannot afford risking the quality and the intimacy of teaching and this beautiful mission of changing people's lives and supporting a whole generation of children by just saying, okay, let's change all of that. What changes is our channel of communication, our medium. How do I speak to you? In the past, we used to be friends. We communicate through writing letters. 10 years later, we're still good friends, but we're communicating through texting. 10 years later, we're still very good friends, but we're communicating through Facebook Messenger, for example. So the principle is the same, but the means are different. That's my final thought.
Couldn't agree more with that. I'm sure many of the attendees of today's webinars would also share that thought. Hala, thank you so much for a truly inspirational and practical session this afternoon. I think you've given us all a lot of food for thought, as well as ideas about approaches, strategies for raising and sustaining levels of motivation, and some very practical ideas, that video in particular, I think, very practical ideas about how you can actually do that in the remote delivery setting. So thank you very much indeed.